The morning of Elena's engagement day felt like a dream. The sky was soft and golden, sunlight spilling through her bedroom window as if the world was blessing her happiness. Her friends filled the room with laughter, helping her put on the delicate white dress she had chosen months ago. She stood in front of the mirror, trying to imagine her future. A grand wedding, a perfect home, and a life where nothing could go wrong. Her fiancé, Adrian, came from one of the most respected families in the city. His charm and status had made him the center of attention everywhere they went. Elena believed she was the luckiest woman alive to have his love. Their relationship had been full of grand gestures, flowers delivered to her door, romantic dinners, at the most expensive restaurants, surprise gifts wrapped in gold ribbon. She thought it was a love built on trust and devotion. The engagement ceremony was to be held at the most luxurious hall in the city. Guests began to arrive, dressed in fine clothes, their faces glowing with excitement. Musicians tuned their instruments, the sweet sound of strings filling the air. Elena's heart beat faster as she waited for Adrian to arrive. But as the clock ticked past the appointed time, something began to feel strange. Whispered conversations started among the guests. Some turned to look at her with pity, others with curiosity. Her best friend Maya tried to calm her. "He's probably just stuck in traffic," she whispered, forcing a smile. But Elena could feel an uneasy knot forming in her chest. Finally, the grand doors opened. Adrian walked in. But his expression wasn't the joyful one she had expected. His eyes were cold, his lips pressed into a thin line. He strode to the center of the hall, ignoring the murmurs around him. "Elena," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I can't do this." The room went silent. She blinked, certain she had misheard him. What do you mean?" Adrian's words were sharp. "I can't marry you. I've realized we're not right for each other. You're not the woman I thought you were." Gasps filled the hall. Elena's hands trembled as she stepped toward him. "Adrian, what are you saying? We've planned everything." He cut her off. "I don't want a life with you. I've heard things, and I can't ignore them. Goodbye, Elena." Without another glance, he turned and walked out, leaving her standing in front of everyone, broken, humiliated, and confused. The room erupted into whispers. Some guests looked away, embarrassed for her. Others watched with the cruel curiosity of people who enjoy drama that doesn't involve them. Maya rushed to her side, holding her up when her knees threatened to give way. Her parents approached, their faces pale. "Elena, let's go home," her father murmured. But she couldn't move. Her mind felt empty, yet heavy at the same time. She searched for answers. What had Adrian heard? Why hadn't he spoken to her in private? Why had he chosen to destroy her in front of everyone? The hall, once a place of celebration, now felt like a cage. Every whispered word, every pair of eyes felt like a knife. Finally, she pulled away from her family, muttering, "I need to be alone." Ignoring the calls behind her, she walked out into the city streets. The cold air bit into her skin, but she welcomed it. At least the wind didn't judge her. She wandered aimlessly, still in her white dress, her veil trailing on the pavement. People stared as she passed, some with concern, some with curiosity, but she kept walking. She didn't know how far she had gone when she found herself in a quiet corner of the city, far from the shining lights and the noise. There, she saw a man crouched beside an elderly street vendor, helping her pack away boxes of fruit. His clothes were worn, and his hair was a little messy, but there was a calm kindness in the way he spoke to the old woman. When he noticed Elena standing there, he didn't ask why she was dressed for a wedding or why her eyes were red from crying. Instead, he simply walked over and offered his coat. "You look cold," he said softly. The coat smelled faintly of soap and the open air. She accepted it. surprised by the gentleness in his voice. For the first time all day, someone was speaking. To her without pity or judgment, they sat on a nearby bench. The man introduced himself as Daniel, but didn't press her for details. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said, "but sometimes it helps to just sit." Elena didn't know why, but she felt a strange comfort beside this stranger. His presence was steady, unhurried, like a quiet harbor after a violent storm. They talked a little, about the weather, about the city lights, about nothing important, yet each word felt like a small stitch repairing something inside her. As the night deepened, she realized she had been holding back tears all day. Now, sitting next to someone who didn't demand explanations, they finally came. Daniel didn't try to stop them. He simply waited, letting her breathe, letting her be human again. By the time she stood to leave, her heart was still heavy, but not as hopeless as before. She returned his coat, thanking him. "Keep it," he said with a small smile. "It's just a coat. You might need it more than I do." She walked away, clutching the coat to her chest, unaware that this brief encounter was about to change the course of her entire life. The night after meeting Daniel, Elena barely slept. The events of the day replayed in her mind like a cruel film. Adrian's cold eyes, the shocked faces of the guests, the whispers that felt like tiny needles. It all lingered, refusing to fade, and yet, between those painful flashes, she kept remembering Daniel's calm voice, the way he had offered his coat without hesitation, how he had spoken to her as if she were just a person, not a spectacle. There was no pity, no curiosity, just quiet kindness. When the morning came, Elena's parents tried to speak to her, but she couldn't bear to face their worried expressions. She left the house before they could stop her, walking aimlessly again, unsure where she wanted to go. Her feet, as if guided by some invisible thread, took her back to that quiet corner of the city where she had seen Daniel. The street looked different in daylight, smaller, warmer somehow. The little fruit stall was open again, the elderly vendor arranging apples and pears in neat piles. Daniel was there too, helping her carry a heavy crate. He noticed Elena almost instantly. A faint smile tugged at his lips, as if he had half expected. She might come back. "You again," he said lightly, setting the crate down. "I thought I should return your coat," she replied, holding it out. He shook his head. "I told you to keep it, but if you're here, maybe you'll let me buy you a coffee instead." It wasn't much of an invitation. No grand restaurant, no fancy gesture. Still, Elena found herself nodding. They walked to a small cafe nearby, the kind where the chairs didn't match and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Daniel ordered 2 cups of coffee and a plate of warm pastries. They sat by the window. Outside, the street was alive with people going about their morning routines, a mother holding her child's hand, a man selling flowers from a cart, a group of school children running past. It was a scene Elena had rarely paid attention to before. For a while, they didn't talk. Elena sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You don't have to tell me what happened," he said, "but you look like someone carrying more than they should." She hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep her pain hidden, but something about his steady gaze made her speak. "I was supposed to get married," she said quietly. "Yesterday, but he walked away." Daniel didn't react with shock or judgment. He just nodded slowly, as if accepting her words without the need for more. "That must have hurt." "It did," she admitted. "It still does, but maybe it's better this way. If he could leave so easily, maybe he wasn't the right one." They talked for a long time. She learned that Daniel didn't work in an office or own a shop. He did small jobs, fixing things, helping people, move, delivering packages. It wasn't stable, but he seemed content. "I like my freedom," he said. I like helping where I can." Elena found herself telling him things she hadn't even told her closest friends. How she had always felt a little trapped by her family's expectations. How her relationship with Adrian had often felt more like a performance than a partnership. When they left the cafe, Daniel walked her back toward the main road. At the corner, he stopped. "You'll be all right, Elena. Even if it doesn't feel like it now." His words stayed with her long after they parted. Over the next week, they met again, sometimes by chance, sometimes because Elena found herself wandering to that same part of the city. They shared more coffee, more quiet walks. Daniel had a way of noticing the small things, the way sunlight fell through the trees, the sound of rain on tin roofs. Elena began to notice them too. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching children play, Daniel asked, "If you could do anything right now, what would it be?" She thought for a moment. "I'd like to disappear for a while. Go somewhere no one knows me. Start fresh." He looked at her with a curious expression, as if filing away her answer for later. "Sometimes," he said, "a fresh start isn't about leaving. It's about choosing something different right where you are." His words made her think. But not everyone was happy about her new routine. One afternoon, Maya visited her at home. "Elena, I've seen you walking around with that man," she said, trying to sound casual but failing. "Do you even know who he is? What if he's just after something?" Elena bristled. "Daniel's not like that. You met him on the street," Maya argued. "He's clearly not, well, he's not someone from our world." "That's the point," Elena replied firmly. "He's not from our world, and maybe that's why I can actually breathe when I'm with him." Maya sighed but said nothing more. One rainy night, Elena found herself standing outside the little cafe again, watching droplets slide down the window. Daniel was inside, reading a worn paperback. She went in, and he greeted her with the same easy warmth as always. "You look like you could use something hot," he said, pushing a cup toward her. They talked until the cafe closed, then walked, under the same umbrella toward the bus stop. When they reached her street, she hesitated. "Daniel, thank you," she said quietly, "for not treating me like I'm broken." He smiled faintly. "You're not broken. You're just between chapters." She didn't know it yet, but this between was about to change into something far more unexpected than she could have imagined. The rain had been falling for 2 days straight, turning the streets into silver ribbons that glistened under the dim streetlights. Elena sat by her bedroom window, watching drops race each other down the glass. Her thoughts were a mess, a tangle of sadness, relief, and uncertainty. Since Adrian had walked away, her life had become strangely quiet. No constant phone calls from his family, no endless discussions about wedding plans, no pretending to smile at people she didn't like. And yet that quietness also left space for loneliness to creep in. But there was one thing that kept her from sinking into the emptiness: her time with Daniel. In the 2 weeks since they had met, he had become a steady presence in her days. They would share simple meals, take long walks, or sit by the river just watching the world go by. She found herself laughing again, sometimes without even realizing it. That evening, Daniel called her. "Come outside," he said simply. When she stepped out, she found him leaning against a lamppost, holding 2 steaming paper cups. "Hot chocolate," he explained, handing her one. "I thought you could use it on a rainy night." They walked together toward the park. The rain had softened into a fine mist, and the lamps cast golden halos on the wet path. For a while they spoke of small things: the weather, a stray cat they saw darting into the bushes, a funny story about a neighbor's loud rooster. Then, as they stopped by the gazebo in the center of the park, Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "Elena," he began, Have you thought about what you want to do next? I mean, with your life? She gave a little laugh, though it sounded hollow. No, everyone keeps asking me that, but I don't have an answer. I feel like I've been pushed off a stage without knowing what play I was in. He leaned against the wooden railing, his gaze steady. What if, he said slowly, you could start over in a way no one expects? She tilted her head. What do you mean? Daniel took a breath, as if weighing the risk of his next words. Marry me. For a moment, the only sound was the soft patter of rain on the gazebo roof. Elena blinked at him. What? Marry me, he repeated, his tone calm but sincere. I don't have much. No big house, no luxury. But I can promise you honesty. And I think we could make something good together. Her first reaction was to laugh, not out of mockery, but because the idea was so sudden, so impossible. Daniel, we barely know each other, he shrugged, lightly. Sometimes knowing someone isn't about the number of days. It's about the way they make you feel in those days. She stared at him, unsure whether to feel amused or startled. Why would you even suggest that? Daniel's eyes softened. Because you don't need another person who'll judge you by what you can give them or how you look at a party. You need someone who'll stand with you even when you're not smiling. Her mind spun. She thought of her parents' likely outrage, the gossip it would cause, the way her old friends would react. But she also thought of Adrian, all his wealth and polished manners, yet none of the loyalty she had needed. And then she thought of Daniel, offering her his coat on the first night they met, never asking for details she wasn't ready to share. This is crazy, she said at last. Maybe, he replied with a small smile. But sometimes crazy is what gets you unstuck. They stood in silence for a moment, the mist swirling around them. Elena looked at the man in front of her, not dressed in fine clothes, not surrounded by wealth, but steady, real, and quietly certain. Her voice was barely above a whisper. If I said yes, what would we do? We'd keep living simply, he said. I'd find us a place. We'd figure things out one step at a time. The idea was reckless, and yet it lit a strange spark in her chest. Something between fear and excitement. She gave a half smile. If I say yes, you have to. Promise one thing. What's that? That this isn't about saving me. I don't need rescuing. I want something real. Daniel's answer was quiet but firm. Then that's exactly what I'll give you. 3 days later, they stood in front of a city clerk in a modest government office. The room smelled, faintly of paper and coffee. There were no flowers, no music, no family members watching. Elena wore a plain dress, her hair tied back simply. Daniel wore a clean shirt, slightly worn at the cuffs. When they signed the papers, she felt her heart beat faster, not from romance in the traditional sense, but from the weight of the choice she was making. They left the office hand in hand. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the streets shone under the late afternoon sun. Daniel led her to a small cafe where they shared a quiet meal to mark the day. This isn't the life I planned, Elena admitted, looking at him across the table. Good, Daniel replied with a grin. Plans are overrated. And just like that, Elena had stepped into a new chapter, one she didn't fully understand yet, but one that felt entirely her own. The first morning after their marriage, Elena woke to the sound of birds outside the window and the faint smell of tea brewing. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The ceiling above her wasn't the grand, decorated one from her family home. The bed was smaller, the sheets plain but clean. This was Daniel's apartment. No, their apartment now. It was on the top floor of an old brick building with narrow stairs that creaked under each step. The place had just 2 rooms, one that served as the bedroom and living space, and a tiny kitchen that barely fit 2 people. The walls were painted in faded cream, and the only decoration was a framed photo of a sunrise over the sea. Elena sat, up slowly, her eyes scanning the room. It was nothing like the home she had grown up in. No polished floors, no expensive furniture, no smell of perfume from fresh flowers arranged by a hired florist. Yet there was something oddly warm about it. Daniel appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I hope you like strong tea. I forgot to ask yesterday." She took the mug, the warmth seeping into her fingers. "I do," she replied softly. Life in the apartment was a world away from what Elena had known. She had to learn things she had never done before. Cooking simple meals, hand-washing clothes when the building's shared laundry was full, even carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs. At first, she struggled. She burned the toast on. The first day spilled water on the floor while trying to mop, and once nearly locked herself out because she forgot the tricky way the door handle worked. Each time, Daniel only laughed gently and helped her fix the problem. "You'll get the hang of it," he would say, as if there was no rush. They didn't have much, but Daniel had a way of making the small things feel like treasures. If they bought bread from the bakery, he would slice it carefully and toast it just enough so the smell filled the kitchen. If they made tea, he'd add a bit of honey and joke that it was their luxury upgrade. Elena began to notice details she had never paid attention to before. How the sunlight through their one small window turned the room golden in the late afternoon. How the sound of rain on the rooftop made the apartment feel like a safe little world. How the smell of freshly cooked rice could make her instantly feel at home. In the evenings, they would sometimes sit on the building's rooftop, watching the city lights flicker. Daniel would point out places he had worked. The cafe where he once fixed a broken coffee machine, the old library where he helped repair shelves, the riverside shop where he sometimes delivered packages. One night, as they sat there, Elena asked, "Don't you ever want more?" Daniel looked at her curiously. "More of what?" "More space, more money, more things," she said. He shook his head. "I want enough to live and enough to help others. That's all." His answer puzzled her, but it also stirred something inside her. She had grown up surrounded by more money, more clothes, more events, yet none of it had ever felt like enough. Now, sitting on a rooftop with a man who was content with so little, she wondered if she had been chasing the wrong kind of more all along. Not everything was easy. Sometimes Elena missed the comfort of her old life, the instant hot showers, the endless wardrobe choices, the way she never had to think about money before buying something. There were moments when she caught herself wishing for those things again. One afternoon, she saw an old friend from her past across the street. The friend was stepping out of a luxury car, dressed in expensive clothes, laughing into her phone. Elena felt a sharp sting in her chest, but when she turned and saw Daniel waiting for her with a simple paper bag of vegetables, the feeling softened. One Saturday, Daniel took her to the local market. It was crowded and noisy, full of colors and smells, bright red tomatoes, baskets of spices, flowers tied with string. Daniel greeted almost every stall owner by name. "You know everyone here," Elena remarked. "I try to," he said. "It's easier to live in a place when you care about the people in it." They bought only what they needed, a few vegetables, bread, and some fruit. When Elena tried to buy a bunch of flowers, Daniel stopped her gently. "Let's come back for those at the end. If they're still there, they'll be ours." When they returned at sunset, the flower seller handed them the last bouquet and said, "For you, half price. You always bring good energy." Daniel gave the flowers to Elena without a word, and she smiled. Not because of the discount, but because of the way he noticed small acts of kindness. One evening, while they were washing dishes together, Elena suddenly realized she hadn't thought about Adrian in days. The memory of that grand engagement hall, of the whispers and humiliation, felt distant now. like it belonged to someone else's story. Instead, she thought about how Daniel always left the last piece of bread for her, how he made space for her to talk when she needed to, and how he never pushed her to be someone she wasn't. Lying in bed that night, she realized something else. For the first time in years, she wasn't living by someone else's expectations. This life was different, quieter, and far from perfect, but it was hers. Still, there were small mysteries about Daniel. Sometimes she noticed people greeting him with unusual respect. A cafe owner who insisted on giving them free pastries. A well-dressed man in a suit who nodded politely before walking away. Once, she saw him slip a sealed envelope into a drawer, but when she asked about it, he simply said, "Just work stuff," and changed the subject. She didn't push for answers. Part of her told herself it was nothing. Another part, the one that noticed how his eyes sometimes grew distant, wondered if Daniel's life held more than he was telling her. One night, as they sat together on the rooftop, Elena watched him staring out at the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Just chapters. How some begin quietly and you don't realize how important they are until much later." She didn't know what he meant, but she felt a strange shiver in her chest, as if something was coming. Something that would change everything again. The weeks passed quietly, yet a certain feeling had begun to grow in Elena's heart, a mix of comfort and curiosity. Life with Daniel was simple, but she couldn't ignore the little things that didn't quite fit the picture of an ordinary man living in a small apartment. It started with the way people treated him. When they went to the market, stall owners would greet him not just with friendly smiles, but with a kind of respect, as if they knew something about him that she didn't. Once, at a bakery, the owner refused to take his money. "You've done enough for my family," the woman said warmly. Daniel simply thanked her and walked away, ignoring Elena's puzzled look. Another time, they were crossing the street when a sleek black car slowed down beside them. The tinted window rolled down and a man in a sharp suit leaned out. "Good evening, sir," the man said respectfully. Daniel nodded back with the briefest smile, then kept walking without explanation. That night, while they were having dinner, Elena finally asked, "Who was that man in the car?" Daniel didn't look up from his plate. "Just someone I used to know." "From work?" she pressed. "Something like that," he replied, and changed the topic to a funny story about their neighbor's cat. There were other strange details, too. One rainy afternoon, Elena was searching for a notebook to make a grocery list. She opened the drawer in the small table by the bed and found a sealed envelope inside. It was thick, heavy, and marked with a name she didn't recognize. Before she could look closer, Daniel came into the room. His tone was calm, but his eyes were serious. "That's not for you," he said gently, taking the envelope and slipping it into his jacket. Elena felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't trying to pry. I was just looking for paper." "I know," he said, his voice soft again. "Some things aren't ready to be shared." She wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her the conversation was over. The mystery didn't fade. In fact, it only deepened. A week later, Daniel told her he had to be away for a day. "A job in another part of the city," he explained. He left early in the morning, wearing a plain shirt and jeans, but when he returned that night, Elena noticed a trace of expensive cologne clinging to him, the kind she had only smelled at formal events. "You don't smell like someone who was fixing a coffee machine," she said lightly. Daniel chuckled, avoiding her eyes. "I'll take that as a compliment." She smiled back, but her mind kept circling around the same question. Who exactly was this man she had married? The most unexpected clue came on a Sunday afternoon. They were walking by the riverside when they heard a shout. A teenage boy ran toward Daniel, calling his name. "Sir, sir," the boy said breathlessly. My mother says thank you for the hospital bills. She said you saved my sister's life. Daniel put a hand on the boy's shoulder. I'm glad she's doing better, he said warmly. Tell her she doesn't owe me anything. The boy nodded eagerly and ran off. Elena stopped walking. Hospital bills? She asked. Daniel kept his gaze on the water. It was a long time ago. That boy said you paid for them. He shrugged. Sometimes people need help. That's not something most people can just do, she pointed out. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes calm but unreadable. Most people choose not to. There's a difference. That night, as they sat on the rooftop, Elena decided to be honest. Daniel, I know you don't want to talk about your past, but I can't pretend I'm not curious. You're not like the people around here. You're kind, yes, but you also have connections. People treat you differently, and sometimes you disappear for hours or a day, and when you come back, you're different. Daniel listened quietly, his hands resting on his knees. For a moment, she thought he might finally explain everything. Instead, he said, Elena, everyone carries chapters they're not ready to read aloud. One day, maybe I'll tell you mine, but not yet. His voice was gentle but final. Still, little moments kept feeding her questions. One morning, she woke early and found him at the kitchen table with a sleek black phone she had never seen before. It didn't look like the cheap one he usually carried. When she entered, he quickly slid it into his jacket pocket. Another time, they passed a group of men in the city center. They wore suits and looked important. Yet when they saw Daniel, they stepped aside to let him pass first, one of them even giving a slight bow of the head. When she asked about it, Daniel only smiled. Old acquaintances. Despite the unanswered questions, their daily life remained steady. They cooked together, shared quiet mornings, and sometimes argued over little things like how much salt to put in the soup. Yet in her heart, Elena felt a growing tension, as if she were living in the middle of a story where the biggest twist hadn't arrived yet. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie awake, listening to Daniel's even breathing beside her, and wonder, had she truly married? A simple man with a kind heart? Or had she stepped into the life of someone far more complicated than she imagined? One evening, as they returned from the market, Daniel stopped suddenly in the street. Across the road, a man in a dark overcoat was watching them. When Daniel noticed, the man gave a small nod before disappearing into a nearby alley. Who was that? Elena whispered. No one you need to worry about, Daniel said, his tone calm but his jaw tight. Elena didn't press him, but she knew, without a doubt, that something was hidden beneath the surface of their quiet life. She didn't know it yet, but the truth about Daniel's past was closer than she thought. And when it came out, it would change not just the way she saw him, but the entire course of her life. It happened on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was sinking behind the buildings and painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Daniel had told Elena he'd be home by 6. By 8, the small apartment was still empty. Elena sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. This wasn't unusual. Sometimes Daniel's small jobs kept him late, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way he'd left in the morning, dressed in a crisp white shirt, instead of his usual casual clothes. Maybe it was the faint tension she'd seen in his eyes. By 9, her worry had grown into a knot in her chest. She called his regular phone. No answer. She debated whether to wait or to try finding him. At last, she put on her coat and stepped out into the night. She wasn't sure where she was going, but her feet carried her toward the part of the city where she had first met him. The streets were quieter here, shadows stretching long under the street lamps. She passed the little cafe they liked. It was closed for the night, and kept walking. Then she heard it, music drifting through the air, soft and elegant, coming from a large building at the end of the street. The windows glowed with warm light, and cars lined the curb. sleek, expensive ones she'd only ever seen in magazines. A man in a dark suit stood at the door. Elena might have walked past if she hadn't caught a glimpse of a familiar figure through the glass. Daniel. He stood among a crowd of well-dressed people, talking to a small group who were clearly hanging on his every word. He wasn't wearing the shirt he'd left in that morning. Now he was in a tailored black suit that fit him perfectly, his hair neatly styled. In his hand was a glass of sparkling water, and in his eyes was a confidence she had never seen before. Elena froze. Her first instinct was to turn away, to leave before he saw her, but her feet wouldn't move. She stepped closer to the window, her heart pounding. The man at the door noticed her and gave a polite nod as if recognizing her. "Mrs. Hale?" he asked in a low voice. It took her a moment to realize he was speaking to her. "Mrs. Hale." Before she could reply, he continued, "Please come in. Mr. Hale will be happy to see you." Too stunned to protest, she followed him inside. The air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. People glanced at her curiously, but no one stopped her. Daniel saw her then, for a moment. His expression flickered. Surprise, maybe even concern. But it quickly smoothed into a warm smile. He excused himself from the group and came toward her. "Elena," he said softly when he reached her. "I didn't expect you. Here." "I noticed," she replied, her voice steady though her heart was racing. "What is this place? And who exactly are you?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "I suppose I can't keep it from you anymore." He led her to a quieter corner of the room. "This is a charity gala," he explained. "It's held every year to raise funds for hospitals, schools, and shelters. And He hesitated before continuing. "I'm the main benefactor." Her eyes widened. "The main benefactor?" "Yes. My family owns several companies, investments, real estate, trade. I inherited much of it when my father passed away. I've spent years trying to use that wealth for something meaningful." Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. "So you're a millionaire?" He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "More than that, technically." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then why the small apartment? Why the worn clothes? Why let me believe you were just—" "A poor man?" he finished gently. She nodded. Daniel's gaze softened. "Because I needed to know. I've met too many people who see the money before they see the person. I didn't want to be loved for what I could give. I wanted to be chosen for who I am when there's nothing to offer but myself." The words hit her like a quiet wave. She thought back to their first meeting, the coat he had given her, the way he never pressed her for details, the small kindnesses, the simple meals. None of it had been an act. That had been Daniel, stripped of titles and fortune. "And you thought, if I knew the truth, I might not choose you?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand. "I hoped you would, but I couldn't take that chance until I was sure." They stood there for a moment in silence. The music from the ballroom floated around them, soft and distant. Finally, Elena let out a slow breath. "You're right about one thing. I didn't choose you for money. I chose you because you were the first person who saw me when I felt invisible." A small smile curved his lips. "Then maybe I chose right too." Later that night, after the gala ended, Daniel walked her home. This time, he didn't try to hide anything. He told her about his decision years ago to step away from the public life his family expected of him. How he had wanted to see the world without the shield of wealth. How he had found more peace in helping quietly than in any business deal. "I wasn't planning to get married anytime soon," he admitted. "But then you appeared, in that wedding dress, with tears in your eyes, yet still walking forward. I thought, Here's someone who understands starting over. Elena looked at him, her heart full of questions, and yet strangely at peace. You realize this changes everything, right? He shook his head. It only changes the background, not the story. As they reached their apartment building, Elena glanced up at the small window of their home. She realized she didn't care about the size of the place or the worn furniture. She cared about the man who had sat beside her on a park bench and offered nothing but a coat, and yet somehow offered everything. For the first time, she saw Daniel fully, both the man in the modest shirt and the one in the tailored suit, and understood they were the same person, and maybe, just maybe, that was the real beginning of their story. The morning sun came gently through the small apartment window. Samuel woke up earlier than usual, his heart beating faster than it should. Today was the day the decision would be made. Lily was still asleep in the corner bed, holding her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Buttons, close to her chest. Her face was calm, peaceful, and innocent. Samuel stood for a moment just looking at her, wondering how such a small person could make his life feel so full. He made breakfast quietly, scrambled eggs, toast, and a little milk, but he could barely eat. His stomach felt tight, like it was tied in a knot. Every time he looked at the clock, the hands seemed to move slower. By 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Samuel opened it and saw Ms. Turner, the social worker, standing there with a neat folder in her hands. Alexander, the CEO, stood just behind her. "Good morning, Samuel," Ms. Turner said kindly. "May I come in?" "Of course," Samuel replied, stepping aside. Lily sat on the couch with Mr. Buttons in her lap, watching the adults with wide eyes. Ms. Turner sat opposite her and opened the folder. "We've reviewed everything," she began. "We considered Mr. Mark's application as well as yours. Both of you care for Lily, but this is not only about who can provide more money or a bigger house. It's also about where she feels safe and loved." Samuel didn't speak. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears. Ms. Turner looked at Lily. "Lily, do you feel safe here with Samuel?" Lily nodded without hesitation. "Yes. He makes me breakfast, reads me stories, and tucks me in. He listens to me." "And do you want to keep living here with him?" Ms. Turner asked. "Yes, please," Lily answered softly, hugging her rabbit. Ms. Turner closed the folder and smiled. "Then my decision is clear. Samuel, you will remain Lily's legal guardian." Samuel almost didn't believe it at first. "So, she stays with me?" "She stays," Ms. Turner confirmed. "You've shown that love and care matter more than anything else." Lily's face lit up and she ran into Samuel's arms. He held her tight, feeling relief wash over him like warm sunlight after a storm. But the moment wasn't without shadows. There was another knock on the door, louder, sharper. Samuel opened it to find Mark standing there. His expression was cold. "I heard the decision," Mark said flatly. "This isn't fair. I'll appeal it." Before Samuel could speak, Alexander stepped forward. "Mark, appeals take time, and the court will still look at what's best for Lily. From what I've seen, she's already found where she belongs." Mark's eyes flicked to Lily, who was clinging to Samuel's side. "We'll see," he muttered before walking away. Samuel shut the door, his grip tightening protectively around Lily's small hand. Later that day, Samuel took Lily to the park. The air was warm, and the trees swayed gently in the wind. For the first time in weeks, Samuel felt lighter. Lily played on the swings, her laughter ringing across the park. She ran back to him after a while, slightly out of breath. "Sam," she said, "now that I'm staying here forever, are you my new daddy?" Samuel's throat felt tight. He thought about the nights they had spent together, about her little hand holding his, about how quickly she had become part of his heart. "If you want me to be," he said softly. "I do," Lily replied with a grin. Samuel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. than I am." They sat together for a long time, watching the sunset. For Samuel, the world didn't feel so lonely anymore. When they returned home, there was a small box waiting at the door. Inside was a set of colored pencils, sketch pads, and a knitted scarf. There was also a short note, "For Lily, from someone who wants her to smile every day." "It's from Mrs. Clara," Lily exclaimed. "She used to knit scarves for me." Samuel smiled. "Looks like you have more friends than you thought." The following week brought a new rhythm. Samuel went to work in the mornings while Lily attended school. In the evenings, they cooked dinner together. Sometimes they made pancakes for dinner just because Lily liked it. Every night before bed, Lily would say, "Good night, Daddy Sam," and Samuel's heart would swell with warmth. One evening, while they were washing dishes, Lily said, "No, you're not just my daddy, you're my best friend too," Samuel chuckled. "And you're mine." That night, Samuel sat at the small kitchen table after Lily had gone to bed. He thought about how much his life had changed. Just a few weeks ago, he was a quiet janitor, living each day without much purpose. Now, he was someone's father, not by blood, but by choice. And he realized that choosing to be there for Lily was the most important decision he had ever made. Outside, the city lights glowed in the distance. Inside, the little apartment felt warm and full of life. For the first time in years, Samuel looked toward the future and smiled. No matter what challenges came, he knew one thing: Lily would never have to wonder if someone would stay, because he would, always.